Hello, viewers, and welcome to the latest episode of the Huddle. Tim Poole here, editor of Gambling Insider, and I'm with Alex Scott, president of WPT Global. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking a little bit about poker. Well, a lot. When it comes to poker, I enjoy the game. I'm not the best player. Just going to throw that out early on.
Me too. I'm kind of the same, to be honest, at this stage. I used to be a much better player than I am today. I'm very much a casual player now.
Yeah, well, plenty to talk about when it comes to poker. Obviously, I'm going to put you on the spot straight away. You played a bit of poker. You might be used to being kind of, let's say I've gone all in on the first before we've even hit the flop, right? Basically, we had the poker boom in the 2000s. We're not in a poker boom at the moment. I guess the shortest way of saying that. Where is the poker industry for you now?
I think so. Yeah, I would agree. We're not in a poker boom right now, at least not an online poker boom. We did have some really, really significant growth around COVID, though, because obviously everybody was staying at home and they had to fill their time with something. And a lot of people rediscovered poker back then. And what I would say as an industry as a whole, um, we've not died down from that completely yet. We've still got some sustainable growth out of that reinterest in poker, that reinvigoration of poker that happened around that time. However, it's probably unlikely that we'll ever see the same type of boom that we saw back in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, that sort of time. And a big part of that is because of the way that regulation has affected poker. So a great deal of online poker now is unregulated or black market poker. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of apps in the App Store that ostensibly are play money poker apps that are actually real money poker apps that are using like under the table cash transactions and things like that to manage poker clubs. They are a lot bigger than people realize, and they especially in markets like the USA, where regulation has really affected the availability of online poker, the availability of legal online poker. So what you see when you look at the sites like Poker Scout that measure the industry, what you're really looking at is the legal regulated business for the most part. And there is this really significant black market because of the way that regulation has developed, which is very unfortunate, to be honest. But if you take that into account, poker is a lot bigger than most people think.
If you were to look at, so I take your point definitely about it being, that the last point specifically bigger than people think. But if we were to look at perhaps why it's maybe dropped a little, certainly, and bearing in mind the kind of reinvigoration during the pandemic, how key is the issue that you just mentioned, but also how important is it just that there's effectively so many new and other forms of entertainment these days that poker is effectively competing with?
I think that's always been the case, if I'm honest. There's always been other forms of entertainment, and we've recognized as a business for a long time, we've recognized that poker is competing against these other things. So it's competing against watching sport. One of the things that we very clearly see when there's a big sports tournament on, like the World Cup or the Euros, for example, we see huge declines on the days of the biggest games, the semifinals, the finals, etc. That's always been the case. And so we've always known really that we're competing against other forms of entertainment. And we see seasonal effects, in summer, for example, online poker is not as popular because people are spending their time outdoors with their friends, they're having barbecues, they are socializing, they're playing sports, they're doing stuff, So we've always recognized that. Yes, now there is a lot more content out there. There's a lot more, viral TV programs to watch. There's more entertainment of all kinds, basically, since online poker was first developed. But I don't think that's been the major impact. Poker is a really great form of entertainment. It's a really rewarding form of entertainment, something that you can learn and get better at and develop your skills and be very successful if you put the effort in. It's an amazing game. I do think that regulation has played a really major part in what you see these days. Regulation in the States has been really disappointing when it comes to poker, very, very slow paced, and generally has segregated players from the rest of the world. or in many cases has segregated players from the rest of the world, and that is very impactful on online poker when countries do that.
Yeah, I mean, makes a lot of sense. I want to talk to you about, I know you got some views on the makeup of the industry, but if we were to talk kind of helicopter view to, unfortunately, use a cliche there, top level, is there anything, so you mentioned the regulation, over the years though, is there anything the industry may have perhaps, and not any company in particular, but overall, done wrong or reacted slowly to, or maybe failed to adapt? Or again, do you think it's more the kind of the factors you've previously mentioned?
Oh no, there's definitely things that we could have done better if we had the gift of hindsight. So what I would say is that in the early days of online poker, we listened a great deal to what serious online poker players wanted. We had a culture at that time where we wanted to make all of our players as happy as possible, and we wanted to reward our highest volume players. And we didn't really understand the impact that that had on the ecology as a whole. And so we essentially built software that was very good at catering to the needs of serious poker players. And as a result, those serious poker players won a lot of money,
Yeah.
from more recreational players. And that created this environment where it's very, very difficult for a new recreational player to come into online poker and succeed. Now, that is something that we bring a solution for. WPT Global brings a solution to this issue. And this is one of the reasons why we've been so successful so quickly. We have a way of managing our ecology, which doesn't disadvantage serious players or professional players. It just limits the number of seats at each table that they can occupy to balance the games out nicely. So if I look at our competitors, you can have a table with 9 players in total, and 7 or 8 of those can be serious professional players, highly skilled professional players. On WPT Global, that can never happen. The maximum number of highly skilled professional players at each table is 2. And that creates a much better, much more sustainable playing environment. If you're a new player, you're going to be playing mostly against players like you know, new recreational, not highly skilled, not serious players. And if you're a pro, you're going to be mainly playing against players like that as well. And that's better for you too.
Yeah, let's stick to this topic because for now, because I was going to bring this in later on. What kind of feedback? So I imagine feedback from newer players will be very positive to that. How kind of the seasoned pros responded to those rules that you've adapted? Is it beneficial for them as well?
Yes, it has. It has been beneficial for everybody. Now, you might ask how this has benefited everybody without disadvantaging anybody. And the truth is, it does disadvantage a certain type of player, but it's the kind of player that we don't really want. The kind of player that it disadvantages are people who are trying to take advantage of loopholes in the rules and things like that. People who are trying to play in a predatory fashion. They're maybe trying to seek out games that only have the weakest possible opposition. You know, those kinds of players will not do well on WPT Global. Our system penalizes them heavily. However, for everybody else benefits from the fact that that isn't happening anymore, and the fact that we curated the games in this way. And most professional players, most serious players that I've spoken to about this, some are initially apprehensive about it, and I was initially apprehensive about it before I fully understood it. But as soon as I actually experienced it for myself and understood what it means for the games, I quickly realized actually this is the future. We have to do this. And also this is what people are doing naturally anyway in private games, which have been so successful. Like I said, a lot of the black market games that I'm talking about that have grown so strongly over the last few years, they are private games where there is a host or an owner of a club or whatever it is, and that person determines who's allowed to play and who's not allowed to play. And essentially, we're kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
If you were a host of a private game, you would never create a game which had 9 pros at the same table and no recreational players, no casual players. That game would not be sustainable because the players just wouldn't want to play each other for very long. You need a balance. And the host of a private game understands that instinctively and creates a game where there is a balance of recreational players and professional players. And that's just what we're doing as well.
Yeah, so are you limiting the impact of the so-called sharks with these kind of rules and the game formats?
Pretty much, yeah. We also this is not the only way that we manage our ecology, and we encourage a lot of action in the games. We also have tweaked the game format a little bit to encourage more action and to reward players who are willing to put in that, are willing to gamble a little bit with their opponents.
Yeah, so one thing, generally speaking, one thing that I sort of spoke to a colleague recently about is we talk about attracting newbies and newcomers, and obviously poker at its best, and I'd say at its best because longer games are fantastic, but they can take a long time. So obviously these days, you have phrases like the TikTokification of sports betting. Jake Paul brought that in the US. I'm glad I pronounced that without stumbling in how to say it. I guess with attention spans overall perhaps being slightly less these days, how do you guys are there any shorter games that you offer? And I know that, for example, years ago now, PokerStars brought in spin and go and things like that. Have there been innovations of that kind enough in the industry?
Yeah, that's been a very consistent theme, actually, ever since mobile became a thing in online poker. And poker was a bit slower to adopt mobile than most gambling verticals. And I think it's partly because we were used to these longer games. Like, if I think about the big Sunday multi-table tournaments with the big prize pools, very often they would take 8 hours or 10 hours to reach a conclusion. Now, to be fair, most people wouldn't be playing for that long. Most people would be eliminated by then. But if you were going to win one of those tournaments, it would take you a very, very long time. And there has been a kind of recognition that attention spans are getting shorter. There is a lot more entertainment out there, as we spoke about earlier, that's competing with you. So you kind of need to deliver that same value to the customer in a shorter amount of time. And there's been a lot of innovation in our industry to do that. There's been a lot of new tournament formats that speed up the game, where the tournament lasts a lot less time from start to finish. Things like turbo, hyper turbo. We've also got variants like bounty tournaments and progressive KOs and things like that result a mystery bounty, which result in a lot more excitement and action in the game. So the game itself tends to be shorter because there's more action. One of the reasons that tournaments can take a long time is if there's not much action back and forth. In cash games, we've had things like Rush Poker, which Full Tilt invented a long time ago. And we've had, again, more sort of action formats, more blinds, more antes, things like that, bomb pots. And then we've also introduced things like Espresso Sit and Goes, which Stars call Spin and Go. We call it Global Spins. We've got our own unique twist on the game with a progressive jackpot. It's the best best version of this game. Like if you like Spin and Go format, you should definitely try Global Spins. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've definitely recognized people are not willing to sit there for hours on end anymore. They want something that's that delivers that same value in a shorter amount of time, the same amount of excitement in 5 minutes instead of 20. Basically.
Yeah. So I mentioned the makeup of the industry earlier on. I think this is now a nice segue to kind of return to that. Obviously, you can tell me about how performance has gone for you guys specifically. But if we look at the overall sector, obviously recently we've had talk of Entain selling off Party Poker, but then you have private companies like GGPoker. Everyone can see the growth there. Can you tell us a little bit about where the industry is going, who's doing well and who isn't, and perhaps if there's any secret sauce as to why?
The market leaders at the moment are GG in first place, PokerStars in second place, and then us in third place. So we've been able to achieve third place in the space of 2 years, which is probably, I think, the fastest anyone's ever occupied that position. Anyone has ever grown to that level. And there are days when we are really within touching distance of PokerStars and may even over. So I do believe that partly because PokerStars is on a decline and we're on we're growing very, very quickly. I think we'll surpass them probably within the next year, maybe two. And we aspire to be the largest within 3 to 5 years. I think that's possible. Now, if we look at who's grown and who's declined over the last few years, it has been very much the case that privately owned companies with people who understand poker in their leadership have been the ones that have grown. So if we look at PokerStars, for example, which is now part of Flutter and is part of this big corporate entity where poker is only really now a very small part of what they do. That's very different to the company that grew so successfully back in the day. And the same is kind of true with Entain and Party Poker. Now, when Rob Young and Tom Waters left Party Poker a few years ago, it declined precipitously. One of the reasons for that, by the way, is because it was forced to leave quite a significant number of markets because Entain, the wider corporate group, didn't want to take the risk in those markets. And while those markets might have been significant to its poker business, they weren't significant to the business overall. So they were kind of forced to leave those markets. And once you start to lose liquidity in poker, it can be difficult to get it back. Really, I think that the common thread is that these big corporate entities that are mainly focused on casino and sports betting don't really know what to do with poker. It's just very, very different to the other games. And I have this experience at microgaming in my past career as well. The company just didn't really know what to do with poker. It was nowhere near as big as some of the other verticals. And if you look at the total size of the online poker business, it might be $3 to $4 billion a year compared to what, 5-10 times that for sports betting. Not quite the same for casino, but almost as much for casino. They're in different leagues, and I can completely understand why people in the leadership of Entain or Flutter would spend very little time thinking about poker. Why would they? It's a small part of their business. But there is still a lot of money up for grabs there. There's still a lot of success to be had if you know poker, if you're willing to invest in it, if you understand what's different about it and how to make it successful. There's such an opportunity there, and that's what we're about. We are a group of passionate poker players who really care about the game, who understand the game. We know what it's like to be a player, and we know what players want. We know we are part of this community. It's just it's so different, and I don't think that's always appreciated by the big companies. Like casino, for example. I don't want to go on forever here, but casino is a completely different type of game to poker. Casino is a completely passive game.
Yeah,
Essentially, if you're
less skill, there's no skill, very quick.
100%. So like if I take a typical slot game, essentially what I'm doing is I'm pressing a button and some kind of animation or video or whatever you want to call it is happening to determine the outcome. But it's a very passive experience. And the entertainment is in how that animation and how that combination of video and sound effects and things like that, how does that impact the way that I feel? Does it sort of trigger those primal instincts in my brain that the game is trying to manipulate, right? But it's a completely passive experience. I press a button, maybe I press another button, but really the outcome is not determined by what I do, what my choices are. Whereas in poker, the outcome is extremely dependent on the choices that I make. Almost entirely dependent on the choices I make. I can certainly guarantee that I would sit down and lose every single hand. That's very possible for me. Can't do that in a slot game. And I can also give myself the very best chance of winning in poker by making good decisions over and over again. And again, I can't do that in casino. And so what we see is like casino and poker cross-sell very poorly to and from each other. It's a very different demographic. The mentality and the psychology of players is very different. Now, there are some regional exceptions to this. Asia, for example, is quite different, and there are some demographics of player that just play poker like it's any other gambling game. They sit down, they don't have any understanding of what the skill element of the game is, and they just treat it as gambling.
With Asia, is that perhaps because that market leans more towards table games and maybe sort of almost table games with a bit more skill involved? And also interested to know if there's got to be more cross sell from sports to poker, right? Or is that also not that similar?
I was going to say that actually there is much more cross sell between sports and poker. It's a similar demographic. Like casino in general is a female dominated demographic, and bingo is a good example of that as well, even more female dominated. Casino and bingo are essentially the same or very similar demographic. It's like you press a button, something happens, and there is an outcome that affects you, and really what's in between is just entertainment. Sports again is, my mentality is the choices that I make are going to affect this outcome. So I can make good bets and I can make bad bets. I can make plus EV bets and I can make negative EV bets. And then there's a lot of like crossover between sports and gambling in the middle. There are a lot of like novelty bets and things like that
Yeah.
that have been introduced over the years to sort of casinoify sports betting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's also, to an extent true in poker.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's definitely a much stronger cross sell and a much more similar demographic between sports and poker.
Yeah, I've got a couple of sort of major topics to end on. And we talked a lot about online, and you mentioned obviously there's a huge land-based sort of poker scene, and playing in person is very different to online. Just wanted to maybe ask you, in terms of the makeup of the overall industry, what kind of percentages are we talking about, and in terms of growth as well, are we seeing different growth rates in terms of actually physically going to events, playing versus obviously the online?
Yeah, so I'd say if we look at the business overall, we look at all poker of all kinds.
Yeah.
Online poker is still generating more revenue than land-based poker, almost certainly. It's actually difficult to estimate because a lot of it is not trackable. It happens in private games and so on.
Hmm.
It's kind of difficult to know. But my instinct, my instinctive impression is that online poker is a lot bigger. That said, though, one of the reasons that I think poker in general is not in a bad place is because of how quickly live-based poker is growing. So we see a lot of indicators of the growth of live poker. So we're part of the World Poker Tour, as you know. The World Poker Tour is having some of its most successful years ever, some of its most popular events ever. The World Championship event in November, December at the Wynn in Las Vegas last year had a guarantee of $40 million and almost achieved it, actually. Came very, very close to that guarantee. And at the same time, there was a World Series of Poker event being held in the Bahamas. So these
Yeah.
two enormous events, both taking place at pretty much the same time in, slightly different parts of the world, still like an absolutely enormous amount of poker being played in that short space of time in the winter of all times.
Yeah.
Then we've got the World Series of Poker in the summer, which has grown for the last several years in a row and broke records last year. Will probably break records again this year. There is also events like the European Poker Tour, which are still doing exceptionally well, and actually I think are having a revival of their own. So live poker, especially live tournament poker, is in a really, really good place right now.
Yeah.
It's growing very noticeably.
Hmm.
And this is one of the things that leads me to believe that actually online poker as a whole might be growing. It
Yeah.
might actually be growing, but we just don't see it because so much of it is in these black market games.
Yeah. Interesting. This you've spoken at length earlier about kind of the serious player and the casual player, and this might sound like a silly question at first because it will never be in a situation where you could choose between both. You're always going to have both. But if you had to say, right, we're only picking serious players or casual players for your business, some meteor has hit and this situation is now real. Which would you choose? Which one's better for business?
Such a hard thing to answer, actually. I think most people will probably say, I just want recreational players. But the truth is, if you had only either group, I don't think you would be as successful as if you had a good mix of both. And that's what we're trying to achieve at WPT Global with our ecology management system. If you only had recreational players, the chances are they just wouldn't generate much money.
Yeah.
Yes, they would play against each other, but because they are recreational, because they are casual, they wouldn't play enough to generate a lot of profits for you as a business. Whereas if you only had serious professional players, you wouldn't make much money either, to be honest, because those players wouldn't play against each other very much. Like They would join the games, they would realize they were playing only against very, very difficult opponents, and they would probably churn quite quickly and go play somewhere else. So the truth is, you can't survive with only recreational players or only professional players. You kind of need the right balance of both, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, interesting breakdown. Final question from me, and this is almost purely so I can get a couple of poker puns in. But last question to give us a full house: what would be your ace in the pack? So you've already talked about kind of the fairness and the limits you have for the kind of the casual versus the serious gamers we just talked about as well. But for WPT and for the industry globally, we talked about you talked about that poker's growing and I don't want to use the word resurgence, but as you say, online is growing and live is growing. 2024, in the coming months and years, what's the ace in the pack that's going to take poker hopefully forward?
So I think this problem of the balance between recreational and pro players needs to be addressed, and we bring something to the table that deals with that problem. Our ecology management system deals with that problem and balances the games to ensure that they're sustainable and that we can make money and everybody can succeed, right? It's win-win, except for that small group of of players that we don't want, like I spoke about. But we also have integrity as a really big focus of ours, game integrity. How do we ensure that the games are free of collusion and cheating and the use of artificial intelligence and things like that? And the truth is, from the very beginning, we've been built to use artificial intelligence to detect those things. Now, AI is a very, very popular topic right now. Everybody's talking about it and everybody's talking about the applications to lots of different things. We were doing it before it was cool. We've been doing it for 2 years. The software provider's been experimenting with it for 4 or 5 years now. So it's pretty mature. The application of AI in our business is pretty mature and it's very successful. It's very good at detecting certain kinds of cheating and fraud and so on. And so we're very good at it, frankly. We have the best tech I've ever seen in this business when it comes to game integrity. And that's definitely going to be one of our unique selling points in the next year or two. Another thing that we're trying to do to differentiate ourselves is we are giving more back to players than everybody else, frankly. We are in that growth phase now as a business, and we know that to grow, we need to spend, we need to invest, and we want to put that into players' pockets where they'll really feel it. We want people to notice that we're being one of the most generous poker sites out there, if not the most generous. We think that people will notice that we are one of the best value places to play, especially when you combine that with the fact that you can win so much more easily in our games than you can anywhere else. You're going to have a winning experience much more often, and you're also going to be exposed to these fantastic promotions. It's a really great combination. And then the final thing that we're doing that I think will really differentiate us is we're focusing on the customer experience from end to end and trying to deliver the best possible experience for every kind of player. So if I go back to my early days in the industry, this is something we did really, really well. Everybody knew that when they had a problem, it would get addressed very, very quickly and fairly and in a generous manner. And that was the norm back then. And one of the things that's happened as poker businesses have been taken over by big corporates is that they've cut costs and they've moved customer support and they've moved software development to places like Eastern Europe or India, where it's much cheaper, and the quality has suffered. We've not done that. We are a fully remote business. We can hire the very best people regardless of where they are in the world. And as a result, our customer experience, our support, our VIP management, all of the different ways that a customer might interact with us, it's exceptional, really exceptional. And I think players will feel the difference when they interact with us.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for your time. A really interesting topic. Hopefully, we've done it some justice, even though I'm sure we could speak for days on end about various different poker issues. But thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tim. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Cheers, and best of luck with everything you're looking to achieve. And to our viewers, thanks for watching.